You're listening to Discovering Truth with Dan Duvall.
I am here to have Robert Van Dries back on the program. He's been on a bunch of times, but not recently. We did a series together called The Depths of Illuminati. And we also did a number of other podcasts, including Montauk Exposed and uh, a program on Hollow Earth and all of his experiences there. Now, Robert is a survivor of satanic ritual abuse and government-sponsored mind control agendas, but more than that, he's actually a defector from his Illuminati family. With that said, he has profound story and insight into data that the average person simply does not. And we have now been working together for 5 years. Robert, welcome back to Discovering Truth.
Well, it's great to be back on your show. Last time has been over, I think, 10 months at least, if not longer. It was about the inner earth or hollow earth. So, yeah, it's great to be back on your show. And yes, we have been working now since March 2014, if I'm correct. So, yeah, there's now 5 years and a month, or 2 months. So, it has
Time
been a long journey.
flies. Time flies when you're having fun. But
Yeah,
but
so
but
they say.
but very seriously, folks, we have tracked a lot of ground together, Robert and I, and um, we're going to take this program, and we talked about this in advance, to break down the journey of the development of Robert's inner world from a redemptive standpoint. And in order to open up this conversation, I'm going to take a few minutes and just explain to you what an inner world is, why they exist, and why, in the process of inner healing, addressing the inner world is mandatory. So the Bible talks a lot about the heart. And in Matthew chapter 13, there's a parable where Jesus explains the parable of the sower. And he says, a sower goes out to sow, and he sows, and some seed falls by the wayside, some on stony ground, some on thorny ground, and some on good ground. And depending on where that seed is sown, it will create a harvest or not, depending on whether the seed gets choked out or it doesn't even penetrate the soil. And when Jesus goes to explain the parable later on in the book of Matthew 13, he says that when the birds come and eat up the seed which was sown on the wayside ground, that is equivalent to the enemy coming and snatching away that was sown into the heart. And in that clause, what Jesus basically explains is that the heart is a territory. And what we have learned as we have done our study into the Word of God is that the heart is synonymous with what modern day psychologists would call the subconscious. It is a realm that is beneath the conscious mind. And truly, while the heart is synonymous with the subconscious from a reader's perspective, the subconscious seems to have an interface with the entire physical body to some level. And so what we find when we get into the work with people is that they will have parts that may interface with different areas of the body physically, like the spleen or the stomach or the throat or the head. But at the same time, when we go into the person's subconscious, we will find an inner world where their parts, that associated fragments of their soul and sometimes spirit, live. And also, we will find in these inner worlds many times, with especially with survivors of satanic ritual abuse, demons cohabitating in there, and soul fragments of other human beings that have been brought into their inner world, as well as labyrinths and mazes and traps and computers and all kinds of other things. But it all comes back to the biblical revelation that the heart is a territory that can be seeded. And yes, it certainly can and should be seeded with the word of God, but it can be seeded with all kinds of other things. And when the powers of darkness, and particularly programmers within the kingdom of darkness, work with an individual, they are, with the assistance of trauma and drugs and light and sound and other technologies, working with that individual to cause them to build structures within their subconscious that will subordinate them into the mind control agendas. And so what we do many times with our work is we come behind what's been set up to establish a person in their bondage and work to undo it, beginning with the setting up of safe places on the inside and expanding out into massive works of redemption throughout the person's heart realm. Well, that's an intro into why we're going to be having the conversation we're having today, but I'm going to tell you this. When I first started with Robert, nothing worked. And, I'm just going to let you talk for a minute, Robert, about, your experience at the outset of, first coming, being introduced to me and us starting to work and how that was for you.
Yeah, I remember that. I have to say, to start with, that my internal programming started to break down. It was about mid 2013. So I have been used and programmed and fully accessed by the powers of darkness for 49 years of my life, as I was born as Robert in 1964. And I met you in October. No, was it? Yeah, I think October 2013, and that was Taylor came out after the programming started to break down, and she became friends with Caroline Hamlet, who brought you because she started to talk with Caroline, and they found both that they had common ground in their experiences and things like that. And originally, I think they wanted first to both to be on the program with you, and that was part of the reason, if I recall, that Caroline also had introduced us to you, if I'm correct. But I think God had still other plans because probably your audience were probably not ready for my story as yet. But nonetheless, that is how we started to meet, and it was Taylor who was on out as my protector, who you first met. And yeah, the first year was certainly a roller coaster in the sense that every time when you made one step forward, at times you had 3 steps of setbacks, and that went on for a whole year. Thank God you are not someone that quit that easily. Thank God. Amen to that. Concerning the inner world and the conscious, subconscious mind, another way how people can see the subconscious mind and to access it is how the medical world uses hypnosis as a tool in order to access memories placed in the subconscious mind with people that had alien abductions, as I had myself as well. So when a psychiatrist, a psychologist uses hypnosis, they accessing the subconscious mind where the memories are stored, memories that has been placed there under a seal of some sort, because the aliens, for instance, they got the methodology and the technique to seal it up for the conscious mind, so it can be accessed through occult tools like hypnosis, because hypnosis is an occult tool, and that is what they use within in the mental health circuit of psychiatry and psychology and hypnotherapist. And yeah, hypnotherapy, or you could say hypnosis, probably goes back even further back in time, probably to the times of the Egyptians, if not even further back to Babylon. But it is well known within the members of the Illuminati, especially the ones that working as programmers, that they can use those tools and that they can access and store whatever they have done or what they have programmed in you through the conscious subconscious mind.
Now, so when we began to work,
Yes.
folks, what I learned about Robert is that he didn't have a simplistic inner world. I have seen inner worlds of all types. Some people, they have a small village. Other people may have what seems to be an entire map or a continent, so to speak, on the inside of them. Uh, Other people have different things, but Robert seems to have what amounts to an internal universe, complete with planets and space and Earth and portals and all kinds of stuff, making it extraordinarily large and difficult to navigate. Uh, we didn't know that at the front end. And, as we began to do work, and back in 2014, I was just beginning to learn how to do this work. And so uh, when Robert was introduced to me, I was actually dreading the thought of trying to work with him because I said, I am absolutely not qualified. I don't think this is a good idea, but somehow it just happened. And so I said, I will try. I will try, and Jesus will make up the difference. But when I started, I didn't have anywhere near the number of tools that we've developed to date. I did, however, know how to get into an inner world without hypnosis and begin to engage with a person's parts and establish a safe place and begin to take down the programming from the inner world itself. And so I began by trying to get access to Robert's inner world, uh, which was pretty tough. But we finally did get to a day where we ran into a medieval village with an empty cathedral. And Robert, I want to just turn it over to you and let you talk a little bit about that. And I know you weren't even out yet because we were still working with Taylor. But why don't you just say a few words about that initial engagement with
All
your inner
right.
world?
Yeah, I think you worked for the first year, if I'm correct, with Taylor mainly.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that, and to talk about inner worlds, they can hook people up when they create the inner worlds with physical locations on Earth, but also beyond Earth, as they did with me, and I'm certainly not the only one out there. And that is another thing that people have to realize. And I don't believe that they can only hook you up to physical, let's say, the physical places on this Earth, but probably even over timelines. So on different timelines and dimensions, if it comes to it, and that's certainly the case what they did with me. Now, yeah, concerning to go back on, now, yeah, when we first met, when we first started, and you came across this, yeah, medieval Celtic village, because yeah, Celtic structures seem to be certainly in the early part quite dominant in my case. I have seen also what we have found out about my real genetic background. It started to make sense, but that's a different topic for a different time about that. But yeah, so you found this cathedral, and then you found, I think, a few entrances that lead up to other parts underground, if I'm correct. And from there, now yeah, with the help of Jesus Christ, and without Jesus Christ, people like yourself could never work with survivors as myself and to unleash and to open up what is inside of us, because a normal counselor would have been jogged around by altars, especially the darker ones, and they would have sent from one point to the next, and they would laugh their ass off because there is no check and balance if you use normal hypnotherapy on survivors. So the only way how you can deal with survivors as myself and others that you work with is through the power of Jesus Christ and his forces. But and of course the enemies also knows that as well, and it's I can now see in a way that some of the computer games that are out there, they are probably based on some reality what they created in, let's say, survivors. Because when I re-listened or read some of the things that we have uncovered, it almost sounds like a computer game, like one of those medieval computer games that you had in the early 2000s. And I think it was you or someone else who said that a lot of computer game creators, I think it was you who said that they also must have been survivors or at least know about this because they seem to base their a lot of the games on things what happens with survivors. I think it
Ye-
was you or someone else, but
I'm not sure, but there seems to be a pulling on the inspiration. It's very interesting, so as folks, as we got into this, we found this cathedral. It was empty. One of the things that we learned was that it was put there by Dr. Green
yes,
for the
yeah, he was
purposes of.
my programmer in my early years. Later, from the age of between 6 and 8, I started to work, or I was assigned to Dr. Barrington, who is also known as Baron Guy de Rothschild. And later, I also was assigned to another programmer who was no other than Prince Philip and his team of scientists who worked for him. Although I think he got not that many survivors under him as Dr. Barrington or Dr. Green or many of the others out there. But in my life, Prince Philip and his team and Dr. Barrington, they became the main programmers after the age of 8. But up till 8, I had Dr. Green, who is no other than Dr. Joseph Mengele, the Nazi doctor that worked with the Jewish survivors or Jewish people in the Nazi camps. And I know that people seem to think that he died. He was given by the Illuminati a different name. He had a couple of names, by the way, and a few of them were even Jewish names. And he traveled under one name, Dr. Greenbaum, but this is a Jewish name. He traveled regularly between the US and the UK and other European countries freely for the programming that he did. And so yeah, that and a lot of survivors probably will recognize this name. And but yeah, he was the architect of my earlier programming in my early part of my life. And yeah, he is certainly a nasty piece of work. What I remember, to be honest, when I remember his name, it gives the shivers all over my body, and it makes my stomach ill, if I'm honest. But yeah, he was one of my main programmers in my early part of my years.
Yes, and so we ran into one of the things he architected, which was this cathedral, and it was actually a place where parts would be taken for torture on the
Yes.
inside of Robert's subconscious. And this is one of the things that, I think helps when people understand. People go through torment, inner torment, and turmoil all of the time. And many times they don't understand why they're in deep depression or deep anxiety or deep fear or other kinds
Or
of
pain.
torment. And sometimes that is not because there's like a demon of fear prodding them on the outside, but because they are carrying programming and they have parts of their subconscious being ushered into areas like this cathedral for torment, sometimes being executed by other parts of their humanity that are given the job of punisher. And so we ran into this kind of a situation. When we found it, it was empty, but it wasn't always empty. And so with God's help, we were able to take it out and tear it down as a redemptive work. And this was one of our first big successes. I remember being very excited that we were finally able to get something after a couple months. But one of the reasons why we had so much trouble was because we ran into an army of fake Jesuses.
Yeah, 18, I think, in total, if I recall. Only 4 were captured, I think, so far. So yeah, that was another thing. Also, what played up with a lot of altars, why they initially didn't trust Jesus when you worked with us, because of the fake Jesuses and how sadistic some of the Jesuses were, and things like that. So that was another thing with a lot of our altars to overcome in the early part. And I think probably fake Jesus is probably one of the general things that they create on the inside, because they know if they come out of it and they're going to work with, let's say, Christian counselors, yeah, they're going to work with the power of Jesus Christ. And if they can make Jesus Christ looking as being corrupt and evil, yeah, that is for them a win. So that was a part to deal with initially, even that the rest are in hiding. A lot of altars on the inside started finally to trust you after a while. So that was a big win. Thank God for that. So, but also to come back, yeah. But people also have to realize, and we still got still a zillion of in what they create also on the inside till you die, especially if you have never been under counseling after you got free, is that they create internal programming centers. So even if you were not under physical programming at a location somewhere, they can still, by creating systems that look, as we had found on many occasions, that look like a programmer, or could have a whole system of, let's say, 100 altars that look the same as the same programmer, and they can place them throughout the subconscious in various locations, and they can still program and still split up more altars. What I have been still doing with us, because we still have not captured all the programming centers. And this is another thing that people have to realize, that this way a survivor can be their whole life, even during the period that they are under counseling, still being programmed or still being split up, and those parts can be still reprogrammed for the forces of evil. And this is something that a lot of people have to realize, that this is still can continue with a lot of survivors, not only with us, but with the majority of survivors.
This is very accurate. And for all of you that are listening, just so that there is no confusion, when it comes to mine and Robert's work, I do not consider myself a counselor, because I'm not. I call it coaching because we are doing intentional prayer work, spiritual warfare, and deprogramming, quite plainly. And so the challenge of fake Jesuses is humongous. And this has been true for many of the survivors that I've worked with. We've run into this, and it slows things down in the front end, because if you call for the help of Jesus or Yeshua or any of his other names, if they have used those names in the programming, you will always, without fail, run into the demon version first. before you encounter the true King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's just the way it works with the programming. And so we spent many weeks just trying to connect Taylor and some of the parts on the inside with the true Lord Jesus Christ. And without success. And we'd try and we'd get in a big battle with a fake Jesus. And sometimes we'd, be able to, on a few occasions, get him captured, shut him down, get him out. Uh, but there was so much distrust on the inside and confusion that it took a long time. It just was not straightforward. And it was even more confusing because they had a fake Jesus cloning center on the inside. And so they would take the fake Jesuses, they would clone them, and then they'd send the clones out. And the weird things about the clones was at one point we had given, I don't know if you remember this, a bunch of the little water guns filled with living water. So if the fake Jesus came around, they could blast them with the living water and the fake Jesus would run away. So they made clones, and the clones were not vulnerable to the living water the same way
Yes.
that the genuine ones were. And so we had to change strategies. This was one of those times where I was literally sitting there wanting to bang my head up against the wall in frustration, saying, how is this possible? This is not even fair. Yet it happened. Go ahead.
Yeah, the water guns, that was something else because they also started using them themselves as kids in the playground. So especially at one point in the school during class, they started to do it on each other. James had a hard time to stop them. James is one of the others that leading our internal school that created the school. But so yeah, they had a lot of fun with those. Those you could say soakers, water soakers, but then with living water. But beside that, yeah, that is to win. Yeah, to win the trust. That is one of the hardest battles, especially when you have in your system fake Jesuses, and that is what people have to realize. And yeah, concerning the secular mental health, I don't trust them for one reason, that a lot of them are part of the programming. A lot of people in the mental health community working as programmers, and they also part of the cover up as well, because with a lot of survivors, they will not believed. They will then being put in a mental ward and put on medication and all those type of things. So I would advise to survivors to find a really good Christian counselor, a counselor or a counseling service like Bright Ministry that has proven to be successful with working with survivors in order to be set free. I wouldn't trust your local counseling service because, for one, a lot of counselors in their studies, I had studied as well with clinical psychology. I was never taught about DID and how it was being inflicted on persons. So if you are don't get this in your training, how in the hell can you help people that dealing with this in the first place? So that is one part. But again, also when you talk about, they also apply, as you said before, demons to altars. They attach demons to altars. So if you are a secular counselor, no matter how good willing you are, if you have not been trained in it, how can you heal that person and to get rid of the demon attached to, let's say, an altar personality? They are not trained and equipped to do this. You only can do this if you got a counselor who has been equipped with the power of Jesus Christ and who have been taught this. And it is and yeah, the Illuminati, they are touching demons. I will not say to all altars, but the majority of them they're using, especially the survivors who has been used in the very deep stuff and dark stuff of the Illuminati. They are completely merged with demons on the inside connected to their alter personalities. us was, and especially depending also how deep your bloodline goes. The deeper your bloodline goes, the more demons are being attached to you in order to keep you as a subject under their control.
Now, wh why don't you take a minute and
Yes.
explain the school
Okay.
and where it started?
And now, yeah, when we started, of course, there was nothing at all. It was only barren landscape and a village here and a village there and all that, as you remember, because they created those places, but of course they created underground tunnel systems and portals where underground the altars were being imprisoned and being programmed and tortured. So after we started and you started to set free the first number of altars, I think with, and then you also started. I'm not sure if it was your idea or Taylor or whoever came up
I
for the
I
school.
I actually think it was James that started the school
Okay,
even before we started working with
all
like
right.
a few parts. But I may
I
be wrong about that. You tell
I
me.
think the reason was because if an altar is out and is in the open world, you need to know how the world works. Yeah, you need to know how mathematics works and all that. Because if you go to a store and you don't know what it all means when you come out as an altar in the open, that was one of the concepts behind the school for James. If they function in the body, then you need to know how the world around us works. So that was part of the reason, and it makes sense, to be honest. So, but yeah, we started with the school. I think we had the first breakthroughs and with the rescues of altars. I think it was 30 if I read or something in some of our old notes, if I recall. We are now over 140,000, but after 4 years now, because yeah, as you said, the first breakthrough came, I think, in 2015. Yeah, because 2014 was like a chess mate. Yeah, you make one move forward and then sometimes three back, and that went back and forth. Thank God you are not a quitter, so thank God for that, and thank you God for sending Daniel in like a pit bull, your pit bull in our life for this. Because I'm not sure if every counselor would have been like that and probably would have given up after a while, but you didn't. But initially, yeah. So the school after the first breakthrough, yeah, the school was created because the altars needed a place. Now, yeah, also for learning, of course. But, yeah, as I said, when they are out in the open, they need to know how the world works around them. You
Yes,
cannot throw them. You cannot throw them in the open, and they don't know how things works and with all the problems that it will bring. So, but so yeah, after the first session, or no, not the first, but after we had the cathedral, I think we had rescued. I'm not sure how much we had rescued in altars then in one of the first sessions, but with the school we started, I think, with 30 plus, if I recall. If I recall the notes I have seen a few years ago, and yeah, that's certainly grown over the last 4 years. Also, the community that Smarty Pants, Brittany Smarty Pants has been creating. She was also one of the authors, and she is very good in design. And probably she was the one that maybe prodded me in my early childhood because at one point I wanted to become something as an architect. I don't know why, but so maybe she was the one that had prodded me in my early childhood, or yeah, in my childhood, with the concept or with the thing to become maybe an architect because she is very good in this in creating things out of nothing, whole towns and concepts like that. But so after the numbers of altars getting setting free week after week or month after month, getting bigger, yeah, we came on the idea to set up, let's say, something like a village. And then you
Yes.
created this center, if I recall, where altars kind of go to, and they will be checked and things like that. And there was this particular angel that was sent in our system, and what was her? I tried to think of her name again. I always call her Big Mama, but that had to oversee when the new batch of altars come in. I tried to think of her name again. I lost her name at the moment.
Yeah,
You
I don't remember her name off the top of my head either. And so, folks, we, Robert's kind of jumping ahead a few years. We're talking
oh,
in
okay,
general terms about the development of his world, but I mean, over the course of our work, we went from a school where 30 of his parts were being educated to over 140,000 of his parts are
currently.
getting educated right now. That gives you an idea of just the extent of the fragmentation that's present with his whole system. But truly, that's the testimony to the power of Jesus Christ, and we've come a very long way because we started with 30, and in the early days, we did get a few altars set free, and others were beginning to come to the surface to share their
Yeah,
story and their information. And what happened was there was kind of no organization. Everyone was vulnerable. And so one person would come up to me, they'd say, "This is what happened to me at this castle," or "This is what happened to me in this underground base," or "Let me tell you a little bit about this," and then they'd get punished. And so they're getting punished, and there's no way for me to ensure their safety on the inside. And so I began to think, we need to have a safe place where the parts that are beginning to cross over to tell their story, to come out, can go and be protected. They're not going to be
yes,
accessed by a massive demon or a territorial power or something snatching them out. Because when they are safe, then we can get on a consistent a path of progress. Because if everyone's always scared on the inside of retaliation and punishment, we're going to stay in this loop of non-start. We're just not really getting it. And this was the first 7, 8 months. So about 9 months in, I decided to set up something that I had been able to set up in a couple other places, which was a water park. And the water park's full of living water. And so essentially Jesus puts the water park in there. The parts can go into jacuzzis, the littles can go down water slides. They have wave pools. Everyone gets to splash around, and since it's living water, you can't drown. You can breathe underwater. And so it's like a very, very safe place that's a lot of fun and redemptive. And so we started working on putting in a water park, and then the next thing was, and this came later, was to put in a military base so that we could get angels staffing the inner world to protect the parts. But this was the weird thing for me. Everyone that I had worked with, except Robert, if I said, "God, would you put in a water park?" There would just be a water park. It'd be like, boom, well, it's there. And then the parts would go run inside and everyone's having a good time. With Robert, we had real-time construction, 1 or 2 months
yeah.
minimum.
I don't know why it is like that, but yes, it's and we had a lot of problems. Yeah, what you said, because you created the first water park, and then it got destroyed when we started to work with another coach who meant well, by the way. She had no harm in her mind, but yeah, there was one, you could say, power. What would you call it? A power, or
It was a Zazel.
yeah, Zazel, who was too big for her to handle, and yeah, unfortunately, it destroyed the water park, and part of the school, and other things that were created in the meantime. So this must have been around, yeah, mid 2000. No, this was in February 2015, if I recall. Yeah, because I remember I was working with her, and at one point we worked on one session over 3 days, 4 hours a time. And on a Tuesday we started to work, and it was clear skies, nice and sunny. And but above my head, where I live, where I still live at the moment, suddenly it became completely pitch dark, black sky, black clouds, and everything else. And I don't know what the neighbors thought. Maybe they thought about what is this weird occult family that you had on TV in the past, or something like that. Um, but it was strange. Well, around the house in the distance, it was all blue skies, but above our home, it was completely dark. It was very weird. And but during her work, yeah, a Cecil came out and yeah, destroyed all the work that Daniel had put up. So yeah, Daniel wasn't all too happy about it, and so she started to stop working, and apparently God told her to direct on other things for God's kingdom, what she did. But so yeah, from that moment we have only been working with Daniel, and that is how things gonna be. Because yeah, I believe if you work with a bit a counselor or a coach, it's always better just to keep it with one. Because if the other one that you work with is not as apt in certain things that your standard coach is, then things like what happened with us can happen, and then all the work that your coach has been doing has been done for nothing. And I don't blame her at all. So don't get me wrong. Unfortunate, I say, so was just too strong for that other coach that we had. But yeah, that destroyed all the work. So Daniel had to create again all over the work that he had done before with the water park and the school and everything. Oh, by the way, yeah, Smarty Pants. Don't tell her like that. But she has apparently plans to even create the water park even much bigger than it is right now. So I spent a lot of time as Robert on the inside there. I also got my own surf bay. I like to surf. As a child, I always liked to surf in the outside world. So I also can do it now in the inner world myself, and snowboarding. And at least on the inside, I cannot break my legs. So that is a bonus with being accident prone as Robert. But yeah, over the course that we are working now, a lot has happened in comparison from the moment that we started with. That, yeah, you could say the subconscious plane was a village here and a village there on the surface, and underneath, by the forces of darkness, the Illuminati and their bosses, they created an entrances to deeper sections on the inside. And that was it. And since we started to work, and we started every on a weekly basis or monthly basis to set altars free, yeah, we needed to create structures like a school, like to say, like the Jesus Happy Cafe, and all those things. And in order, also, you could say, for internal counseling, or at least a place where alters can come to rest, and they can start to tell their story to the angels, counseling angels that are also on the inside. Because people don't realize that God's kingdom has angels for any job that we have on the physical earth. If people think, oh yeah, we got just angels and that is it, they fly around. Sometimes they give a message to humans. They are wrong, because you got angels for every type of job that we have physically on this earth. as we have seen on our inside, and Daniel can probably attest this with other survivors who have spoken about their inner world in similar manner. And so yeah, this is something that Christians has to realize, that angels not only come out in a Hallmark card type of card package as angels have been seen with wings, and they just fly around and that's it. But certainly without the angels, our system and that of other survivors could have never been developed for the healing as it has been right now.
And the
So
truth is, sometimes I get this silly question from people, which I mean, when a person's on the outside, it is actually a very legitimate question. But, you know, people ask, why would you work with angels when you can just work with Jesus? And that seems to be a pretty standard question especially when people are coming from a more religious background, or, just any kind of thing that has basically rendered angels of very little consequence to the believer's experience, or gone into the fear realm and said the only ones that get to have encounters with angels are the New Agers, and they're all demons, and so we just have Jesus. And it's very short-sighted. The kingdom of God is full of angels, and the Bible says that we have come to the heavenly Jerusalem, to the city of the living God, to Mount Zion, to an innumerable company of angels. And that's where we exist in Christ as believers. And so we have found that, look, especially when a person's dealing with fake Jesus programming, and there's a barrier to connecting to the true Lord Jesus, because before you can connect with him, the parts automatically connect to either a demon, or a former programmer, or a clone, or some other kind of thing on the inside that's a perpetrator and an abuser. And when you're dealing with that, it's often much easier for the parts to begin to work with the angels than with Jesus directly. It's just that barrier of trust has to be ministered to over a period of time. The fake Jesus have to be addressed. The false belief systems tied to it have to be addressed, and eventually there will be a breakthrough. We did hit a breakthrough with Robert, where he did connect with true Lord Jesus. That took a while. And so we work with angels all the time because they're here to minister for us. And so anyway, what Robert is explaining was absolutely true. When he was working with this other individual, things didn't go well. Things didn't go well. And he came back to me with the report, and I actually got a list of about 24 names or 30 names of all of these different parts. I mean, I still have the list in my notes now. Everyone that got injured during the destruction of the water park. It was a really bad time, and a lot of discouragement on the inside, thinking, wow, this is just terrible. This is so difficult. I thought we were safe. And so we had to, do a lot of cleanup work. And so I said, well, let's put another water park in there. But this time, let's reinforce it. And while we're at it, we're going to put a military base in here so that we can bring in a whole bunch of angels to staff the inside, protect everyone. But a lot of the parts on the inside didn't like military base because that's threatening. There's a lot of programming that happens in military bases. So we put a big sign on it called House of Prayer, right? So it's actually a military base, but it's really a house of prayer where the angels respond to the prayers of the saints and come in. And so we put a house of prayer in there, and attached area where, like Robert explained, there's someone, we call her Big Mama, and she helps the parts that are being brought in, because we're always rescuing parts. And so these structures took at least 2 months to build. And every week I'd get on the phone with Robert. I'd be like, is the water park up yet? Under construction. No! Still? Go ahead, Robert.
yes, yeah, and so yeah, as I said, the woman itself, she meant well. So I don't she thought that she could handle it, and unfortunately she didn't. And So yeah, it has caused a lot of harm on the inside, with a lot of altars being injured, and also their trust being put down. And so yeah, then Daniel started to rebuild everything, of course, and we had also invisible shield now also around the energy field around the park, so it could not be destroyed again as it was in the past. So, but yeah, people have to realize that God created the angels for a reason, and and God has given all the angels in the heavens uh, each their specific job. It's the heavens is in many ways no different than this planet, with all the jobs that we have in this physical earth. And that is what people have to realize, and that is including in God's kingdom, at least with the angels. I don't know with the souls that die and that go over to the heavens what happened with them, because I have never heard someone speaking, oh, they were in contact with their loved one. I don't think it worked like that. I know that you get people who claim to be in contact with a loved one. Personally, I feel they are more deceived with a demon who pretend to be a person. But nonetheless, for angels, yeah, God created them because they are helpers in God's kingdom. And so, if that is the case, why not, when you work as a coach or counselor with survivors, why not use that fact that angels are there as God's helpers and that they all get different functions? And why not employ that when you work with a client? So that we got all those different angels with different jobs is for us not something strange, because it is a natural thing that flows from the heavenlies, from the
Now,
heavenly realms.
beginning at that time, one of the cool things that did come out of all of this was Traxxas took an assignment with you and your
Yes.
parts for a season of time. Why don't you talk a little bit about Traxxas?
Oh, by the way, last time I saw him was over a few weeks ago. He told me to give his greetings to you.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah, you worked for him for a while, if I recall, in 2015, I think. And he is a kind of a eagle. What is about has a span, has the length of his wings, what is at least 20 or 30 feet tall. And he has certainly been, if I recall, a big help in the early part when Daniel started to work with us on the inside. And certainly with also rescuing a lot of the altars in the early part and on various missions. And so Daniel, I think, has worked. How long have you worked with him? Probably for months.
It was just a few months. Yeah,
Yes.
he seemed to show up in all of our sessions, and I even remember different parts getting on his back and flying around
Yes.
on
They
him, and
enjoyed it. It was as if they sound like those movies there that people flying on dragons. In this case, it was an eagle, but nonetheless. So yeah, they had a lot of fun. I wouldn't mind if he was in the real world like that. I wouldn't mind to sit on his back and fly. At least it saves me a lot of money on air travel, if that could be in
right.
the real world. But although I'm not sure how the Air Force will react on it, but that's a different matter. But yeah, so yeah, a lot of the now yeah, in the other there are realms that I have been working in, but it has to do with something else, as I may told you. And in that realm, we flew on dragons, I had a few occasions that we dealt with the Air Force, and they were flat. And unfortunately, they couldn't hold. The dragon was still too fast when they tried to shoot their rockets off, because the dragons were easily to evade the rockets. But there are realms, yeah, that look similar like us, but slightly different in the sense that yeah, you had their light dragons, and I must say, uh, you had so good and positive, and of course also the bad ones. But you can imagine in this physical when that realm would, let's say, mix or merge with this one, and those dragons would be visible, become visible. Because I was always joking with another one that I was working with. I said to him, "What would happen if our realm, this realm, and the physical realm would merge, and we would ending up on the radar of the military? How they would respond?" So yeah, you can imagine if that would happen. Uh, God knows what will happen, and certainly how of course pilots will react. As you can imagine, pilots in the air out and report back to the the radar tower. Oh, the blip was a flying dragon. I think with a person on the back. I think that the pilot in question probably will have to come before the psychiatrist in the Air Force, because they will have a hard time believing it and probably think he is either drunk or on drugs. But nonetheless, if certain realms would, let's say, merge with this physical realm,
Mhm.
then you could have situations like this. So I've not seen it, I've not heard it as yet. Doesn't happen as yet, but I wouldn't be surprised at one point in the future it could happen, and the consequences out of it. But as we said before, with the inner worlds, they can connect you to other realms and and things like that. And I'm not the, as you said yourself, I'm not the only survivor who has been connected to other realms and to other places. So there could be other survivors that you work with who had maybe similar experiences as I had. Although this experience was connected with work I did going back to my teenage years back, and to the 60s, 70s, and 80s that I did in the other realm, but nonetheless, yeah, connected with internal worlds. They run not only through this physical world, but also different timelines and different dimensions. And yeah, some survivors is maybe the inner world is more complex than others, as you mentioned before as well, also depending on how much they have used you in other realms, in other timelines, and the purposes that you have been used in. But yeah, with Traxxas, the little certainly had a lot of fun by flying on sitting on his back, and then and then soaring through the skies. As I said, if if he would land in my garden right now in the physical, I would sit on his back and I would then fly with him in the air. I don't think we have eagles like 30 feet tall, but if it would happen for real, I certainly would try it out myself.
So, so as we were working on stuff, Trax actually helped us a number of ways. And when the school finally reopened, after it had been destroyed, um, it was Traxxas that suggested to pray for an allocation of heavenly troops to create a contingency on the inside. I actually
Yeah,
wrote that down in my notes because, it's funny that idea didn't originate with me. I wasn't sitting there like, yeah, let's pray and invite angels into the system today. Like it was actually this guy, one of the angelic hosts of heaven, talking on the inside of Robert. It was a part of Robert Taylor that was out at the time. And so Taylor was telling me what he was saying through Robert's mouth physically. Like, well, Traxxas is saying we should pray for a contingency of angels. And so it's like, oh, that's a really good idea. So after the school opened, that's when we began to militarize. And it was about 60 angels that came in the initial contingency. Now, one
yeah.
of the things that Robert has mentioned. Oh, go ahead. Did you have something you wanted to?
We got now over 10,700 plus angels in various
We,
functions, but none. Yeah, so a lot of them are also used for safety and things like that. But So yeah, that it has certainly grown from the 60s to what it is now in the same way as when we started the school in an exponential way over the years. And there are still a lot of altars still hidden and in imprisoned. So I don't know when that part is finished and how many altars there are done on the inside. And you mentioned to us before also that not all the altars per se has to be of mine. It can also be of others, that they can create altars, get it out of the person, place it in another altar in another person, and place altars of another person into your body. So that is another problem for the future that we have to deal with to shift how many
Okay.
altars will be of me as Robert, and how many are of others.
Since
So
you brought it up, since you
yes,
brought it up, I have to let you explain this to somebody. Somebody's got to hear this. We met someone named Orisu. All right. And this one shattered my grid. So Orisu was brought from another timeline in like 1400 AD
Japan.
from Japan.
Yes.
And met Jesus on the inside of Robert, got saved, and wound up going to heaven. But I could not. So Robert, I'm going to let you just talk a little bit about, because she was with your system for a while.
I
I
know.
think
And
she even taught martial arts to some folks on the inside. Talk about it.
yeah, yes, she did. She was from the 15th century, if I'm correct, 15th or 16th century, from feudal Japan, when you had the ninjas, clans, and the samurais. She came out of that, and I got a feeling that she came in at a point when I was 6, and I did a deep meditation as I was taught, and somehow that must have ripped open a hole somewhere in the time, whatever continuum, whatever. And that is how she entered into my body, or at least in my internal system. But yeah, she found us being completely from a different era. She found in the end Jesus Christ on the inside and got saved. And finally, when she went up, she now finally found her place in heaven. But this is only one example. But no doubt Daniel have other examples, maybe with other survivors, maybe not in an extreme way as in this case. But yeah, with her, she came from a completely different time frame that we live in the 21st century now, and she came from uh, 5 centuries back at least. So everything in this world was completely alien to her, and but she has been too used to us because she taught, yeah, the littles on the inside and others martial arts, because still a lot of the littles, they were attacked by the darker ones and demons. So the knowledge that she was grown up with, and when she came in our bodies, she died by the age of 16 in her time frame. So she kept that age when she entered into us, and also for a while she entered into the school as well. So with the littles and all the teenage altars and things like that. So, but it was strange to find, yeah, to find this out. When was it that we found this out? Was it
I don't.
2015 or 16?
It might have been late. It certainly wasn't in my notes for this program, but it
Yes, it
was
was weird.
just
And now it also now explains, because I had always a thing for the old Japanese culture.
mm,
But I couldn't explain why. But now, with finding out about this altar, or if you can call it an altar, or whatever you call it, now,
Person.
yeah, person, it's now all started to make sense because I never could, through my whole childhood and adult life, I had always some affinity with ancient Japan for that culture, but I never could explain why. And so it makes me even wonder, in my as in my case, that you could have others, or that you could have other survivors who could have, let's say, other personalities of someone else inside of them that may become even out of medieval Europe, out of the times of, let's say, the knight, as that they died as a knight on the battlefield or something, or even further in time. And the question, of course, is how did I came in that person? In my case, it was through a very deep trance meditation that I was taught uh, from the age of 4 onwards. And I think in this case, I was about 6, I think, around that time.
That is
So,
just incredible. I
but
mean,
yes, it is. And I was flabbergasted myself when I found out about her because it was a female. So instead of, yeah, because she was born in a clan, a Koka Koga clan, Koga clan, what was one of the what was one of the major clans in medieval Japan. And you had the Ika clan, what was the majority, and you had the Koga clan. And she died in battle when the village was attacked, and she tried to save her younger brother and sister, and she was killed by arrows in her back from a samurai and things. But so she was died in battle. And she was about 15 or 16 when she died. But if that happens to me, then there are others out there that probably has maybe also personalities from other persons in them that could come from, let's say, other also different timelines. As in case with what was her name? I tried to think of her name again.
Arisu.
Yeah, yes. So it makes
Yeah,
me wonder.
and just to kind of ground this out for people, uh, in this work, I get my grid shattered all the time. I will often begin with a certain set of beliefs, often that I've been taught in the church, based on an interpretation of scriptures that says one thing, right? And then I get the actual situation, which I cannot explain with what I thought I had as truth. And so I have to allow the Holy Spirit to explain things to me a different way in order to make sense of of the nonsense, which is not nonsense. It's just what presents. And you know, death has been one of the big areas I think the body of Christ has just been a little short-sighted regarding, because the traditional theology around death that basically sounds like this: everyone, you die and you either go to heaven or hell at the moment of death. That's it. Does not stand up to the evidence. And it's not just Robert, it's a lot of cases. There's some strange stuff that's going on. Very strange. And isn't it just like the mercy of God to take out of 16th century death experience, transport them into another vessel, or allow for that to occur? Like, how does this even make sense, right? And then spend years in the system, ultimately that is destined to meet Jesus, have an encounter, and then as that person have an encounter in that system and still go to heaven from a culture that would have never exposed her to the gospel of Jesus Christ by the age of 16. You know, this kind of stuff is not isolated to Robert. I have met all kinds of souls in other people that I have sat down to work with. One of the big ones is twins. when there are two twins in the womb and one dies, and the surviving twin stays in there, that the surviving twin fetus consumes the other, and so some of the DNA of the twin goes into the surviving twin, and in that transaction, it's like a whole portion of the soul goes with it. And so many times when I talk to people who had a twin die in the womb, I meet the twin on the inside and introduce that twin to Jesus, and then they go, and the person feels them leave. And it's like, this isn't possible. This is not the Christianity that we were taught in church. You know, either go to heaven or hell, the moment of death. The moment of death is the big schism, because the moment of death is not so solid. As a matter of fact, the Bible says it is appointed unto men once to die, and after that the judgment. Well, we realize that in that passage, which is basically the foundation stone for most of our belief, you know, most people will quote that when they say what they believe. It refers to a judgment that is probably the great white throne judgment, which doesn't occur until Revelation chapter 20. So between death and Revelation chapter 20, there's a lot of gray area where this phenomena does take place. And that's where we've had a lot of our view corrected, because I'll tell you what, people are in bondage that they don't understand, and their ministers don't understand. And because the bondages aren't being addressed for what they are, breakthrough isn't happening. In any case,
because initially when she came out, when I found out, I myself had a hard time to believe this, that she was true, and that she was not a figment of my imagination, because, as you said, this is not something that you normally learn in church. In church, you learn through in the Bible, or at least in the church, that when you die, you go either, to heaven or hell, and so, and then also the Bible then says, or the pastor or whatever, that in case some probably would have called her maybe ignorant, especially when they're ignorant, like a demon, because that is, I have heard that a lot of time about my altars, especially local church, when I told about IMDID. They said, nice meeting you, but we don't want you and your demons. So that was for me a put off for churches, and in particular Christians at that point. Thank God Jesus Christ never gave up to me. So, and thank God I met a few good Christians at that time on Facebook that you know as well, some of them. So that kept my faith in Jesus Christ and the faith in Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ itself. But a lot of people, as I have noticed, especially who are ignorant, who call them altars like demons, and it's really beyond belief. It makes me wonder, what is it what they think that altars are demons? Is it said in the Bible as such? Probably they don't have heard the story of. There's, I think, there's particular story about what is the name of that particular person that was saved by Jesus, and the demons were let out. A group of demons that went into a pig or something.
the Gadarene demoniac.
Yeah, there's one particular story, so Christians must think about that.
Oh, and the Legion.
Yeah, Legion. Yeah, so, but it does hurt when Christians then call your altars and demons. Wow, that is not the, and besides, as survivors, we didn't ask to be abused, and all the things that happened to me, to us and me, and that created all the altars in the first place. So sometimes that makes me angry on Christians when they call your altars demons, and doesn't want to deal with you because of this. And it really, I can see on a high level, I can see why churches probably think like that because, let's be honest, a majority of pastors, ministers, priests are also Masons. A lot of them, I don't say all, but a majority of them are also Masons, and that is how the Illuminati has completely infiltrated the whole church communities from top to bottom, not to mention the college Bibles and stuff, and with the educational thing about for pastors, yeah, that goes back 150 plus years with the infiltration. But so I can see from that point, yeah, why churches are misleading their flock because they are completely infiltrated. Sadly enough, because
Good.
the last thing what survivors need is that they kind of be demonized by a pastor or by a minister when they come to a church for help, or that they want to hear the word of Jesus Christ, and then you're going to be abused as what happened to me. And as I said, I almost lost my faith in Christ. Thank God I didn't give up, but for the same token, I could have given up in a worst case scenario. Thank God I didn't, but nonetheless, it does hurt when then the people that you think who are of the people of God, and that they then abusing you by calling you those words. And yeah, Christians, I believe have still a lot to learn about this because things are not as black and white as their local pastor and minister tells them. And it is said that still a lot of Christians in their churches gonna hear this type of thing. And so I certainly hope that the churches are waking up, and that certainly the rotten apples, as Freemasonic pastors and ministers, will be exposed for what they are, and that then the right pastors and ministers will take their place because otherwise this will continue in churches. You would expect that churches are a safe place for survivors to go to, but right as I have witnessed, and besides also a lot of my programming were also connected with people, also some of the programmers were also pastors and people working in churches, not to mention the rituals taking place in churches. But you would expect that a church would be a safe place as being
Well,
the vehicle of God. But sadly enough, that is not always the case. And
that's true.
and especially including with the teachings, how people are being misled. Sadly enough, I know that the people listening to your podcast and to Bright Movement International, at least those people are educated, and maybe similar churches out there online. But the people that go to a mainstream church, yeah, unfortunately, a lot of them are still being misled, sadly enough.
Sure.
And I certainly hope that will change. So I hope that will change over time
Well,
because I feel.
we're
Hmm?
we're definitely believing God for that.
Yes, because I feel the wave of survivors that will come out of the programming for the future, that will be overwhelming.
Yes, 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 yes.
And they
I
need the
think
right
so.
help, and they don't need the abuse from churches that will then call them out as being demons, and all that. What happened to me, and I don't wish that to anyone, nor abusers nor survivors. So, and I certainly also hope, yeah, that Christians themselves, that they take the time to investigate this more with an open mind, instead of just only listening on a Sunday what the pastor says, just to do their own homework, do their own research. Because
Yes.
every Christian in this struggle is needed for the times that are ahead in the next few decades that lies ahead for us. And so I certainly hope that Christians will be more open-minded about it, and not just take anything what their pastor says on blind faith. especially when they call altars like demons, because survivors are not served by this. It will hurt survivors, and that will even put them more away from Jesus Christ, and that could even drive them up more in the arms of even their former abusers and Lucifer, and
Wow.
or even the New Age, what is one of the tools that Lucifer uses.
Come on. Very, very, very well said, Robert. Thank you for saying that. I wanted
I
to.
speak out of my own experience, and I was deeply hurt when a pastor told me this. Not to mention also my part.
Mm,
So, and the church is the last institute you would expect, especially if it is from God, that you would expect abuse from. And I was maybe I'm sometimes too open, as Lauren and Taylor says, because I throw out everything in the open, as Robert that is. But maybe it's part of my innocence. But nonetheless, you don't deserve that type of abuse, especially if someone is open about what happened to him or her. And it is already hard to admit that you are a survivor and the things that happened to you. So you don't need any abuse from anyone else, especially from people from God. Us pastors, ministers, they are servants of God. So you would expect that they will be careful in what they are saying, and that they are driving you not into a mental hospital that they drive you crazy or
mm.
things like that. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to say, and also to Christians that they do their homework and also more careful when they deal with survivors without trying to even that they may be not realizing that they may abusive in what they say, but that they should be careful in what they say to to survivors, because survivors need help, in particular of the people of God.
Yes, and I mean, that's why awareness is key, and that's one
Yeah.
of the things we're believing God for, and even, right now where Bride Ministries is being positioned, I really believe that in the future we're going to be used as a bridge of sorts between the world of survivors and the general mainstream church. I think that God is trying to build that bridge one way or another with whoever He can. Because you're right, Robert. The church is, the only difference between Bride Ministries and most churches out there in regards to who's showing up is that we know who our survivors are, because survivors are in every church right now, all
Yes.
across the country and around the world. And there's an ignorance about that. And so many people that have problem sets that would be much better served with the understanding of survivor issues are not being served. They're just going in psych circles and learning how to develop church acceptable parts that can present in the community, but not actually getting the healing and breakthrough they need in order to walk in transformation. And but I think that there will be a shift, and I'm very hopeful.
I
But
certainly hope so, because probably there are even more survivors out there that doesn't even know that they are survivors yet.
yes,
So as I said, my programming started to break down in 2013, although in 1998 some of my memories already started to break down. But my handler gave an interview that David Icke had with Arizona Wilder, and a certain part, I'm not sure what part of the interview, had jolted me back deep under programming for some reason for the next 15 years. So I don't know. So I don't know what it was what triggered. Besides that, I recognized her from the rituals, the high level rituals I was used in. So I had recognized her, but something in what she had said had triggered. me on the deep programming for the next 15 years. So my programming started to break down finally in 2013 instead of what could have been otherwise in 1998. But so I was for 49 years under full control and being fully used. And still parts of me up till now are probably still being used at times. As I told you, things that happened, as you said, even if there's one altar that is still in agreement with the cult or the Illuminati or Lucifer, then they still have a right to use you. So we still have a long way to go then. But nonetheless, in our case, yeah, that it has been quite a journey, and certainly from 2013 up till the present, especially
So
when we started the counseling.
so let me say this. We're going to be closing in a few minutes, but before we close, I would like to explain how we eventually walked into a pattern where every week 60 to 70,000 parts are getting rescued by the angel armies.
Yeah, that is certainly another thing. Yeah, when did that started?
Well,
Around what year again?
yeah, this started in 2015. And so, according to my notes, and folks, this is one of the phenomenal things about our learning curve is that we learned how to let the angels do their jobs.
Yes.
And it's cut down on time because in 2015 and even, yeah, 2014, there were times where we had sessions that went 3, 4, 5, 6, and I think the worst case scenario, there was a day where we actually went 7 hours.
I was
Uh,
on. It was for me the hardest because I had to hold the phone for 7 hours on my ear, and my ear was heating up.
but we had discovered, and I'm going to tell you how, that there were these deep underground bases, not necessarily physical, but they were on these other planets. And I think that the planets were part of Robert's system, but may have also been at the same time literal locations on other planets in either this universe or another one.
Yeah,
Possibly at the same time. And this is one of the interesting things that Robert already brought up is that with the internal world, sometimes you are in the inner world, sometimes you are actually going through a portal and exiting the inner world, and sometimes a place or a location is in the inner world and somewhere else at the same time, which in our mechanical 3D thinking and Newtonian physics makes zero sense, but yet it's true. In any case, after the school was finished and the water park was built, we ran into a day where I was even more supremely frustrated because it's like been 3 months and the water park finally reopens, and I'm like, yes, we have a safe place for the parts to go, and then they were like, oh no, the water park's not open yet. But it's finished building. We haven't opened it. There's going to be an opening ceremony in a few weeks. I'm like, what is going on? Who makes the rules in here? But we had met another part, and she informed us, and this part had been part of the Montauk projects, but she informed us of a system of 80 plus prisons guarded by these gargoyle reptilians. And in order to get to the prisons, we had to go through space to this desolate planet. And like I said, I think this was part of Robert's system because the system is like a cosmic system. So we go, and this is actually the same um, time that we met a angel by the name of Jake. And uh, Jake began to work with us to raid these prisons. And he'd bring a whole army of angels with him. And so when we would go to these bases where all of these parts of Robert were being held hostage and in prison, we call these regions of captivity in, simpler terms. Uh, we would go with the angel army with the captain Jake, and they would go through level by level, and these bases would be expansive. I mean, like a mile big on each level. And the angels would go through and blast the gargoyle reptilians. And, the parts of Robert that were on these journeys would actually be in the company of the angels watching it happen. And they would round up the guards. They would get the parts out of their captivity, whether they were in test tubes or in cages or coffins sometimes, um, other types of stuff. And they would take them back to the safe place on the inside that we had built. And we started off setting free, maybe 50 or 100. But now we have multiple teams of angels every week that go out, raid massive bases without us going with them for hours through each level. And they will bring back tens of thousands of parts about 24 hours or so after we make the command to go on a weekly basis. Anyway, I want to let you talk a little bit about that.
Yes, and maybe we can expand this in a follow-up on this interview, because we did a session, although the session was planned for something else, but you had something about a dream that a part of me was somewhere hidden in a planet or something, and so we ended up, I think, was it connected with the planet or with the sun, Rigel in Orion, and if I recall.
Well, I think what you're talking about was your brain, which we talked about in a former podcast. And so, folks, if you
All
missed
right,
that,
okay, but to
go
come
ahead.
back on that part, that the system of me, is connected to physical locations. The question, of course, is if it was, let's say, Orion within the third dimensional universe, or even the fourth or fifth. But yeah, how our system is created and that of other survivors, yeah, that can be to timelines as well, to physical space. Could be space on here on Earth, or space out there outside of the Earth, to other planets and even multiverses, because our system has been created into the multiverse, to other, even other universes, as we found out. Uh, but yeah, with the ratings, what we do now on a weekly basis, it's almost like it's what you see, let's say, on Earth with refugees that is entering into a country, and when we raiding those places and we rescue those altars, yeah, we created this place on the inside, with this Big Mama, or what, I tried to think of her name, Angelica or something, or
Was it Gabriella?
no, not Gabrielle. I may have to look in my notes, but
Okay.
I always call her Big Mama. She doesn't like it, but she looks like a Big Mama. But nonetheless, she is the one that received with her team those numbers of altars, in order to patch them up and to let them heal in this place. And Smarty Pants is gonna has been make it even bigger than it is already. She's even planning maybe to expand it to other locations as well. But nonetheless, she get by the week grumpier because of the numbers that we have been rescuing for a while now. And sometimes the battles, especially in the early, it was almost as if you was watching like one of those sci-fi movies at times. But this is what could happen with survivors, what has been created on the inside. And again, I'm not the only survivor. I don't believe I'm the only survivor with a system like this, and with battles, what has been happening on the inside, when they have altars being placed in dungeons, in prison camps and laboratories, etc. And what they do on the outside world in with survivors, they create a parallel as they did with us on the inside. And I probably guess for 90% with survivors that is probably happening. I'm certainly not the only one. At least I hope not.
Yes. Well, Robert, you've done such a really great job. And folks, this is the thing. As we, as the body of Christ, begin to get more familiar with this territory, we're going to become much more effective at ministering to people and advancing the agenda of Jesus Christ. That this comes back to the agenda of Jesus Christ. What is his agenda? Isaiah 61, to open the prison doors to them which are bound, to set the captives free. Like that extends into this world that we are talking about, which is why we're talking about it. And I appreciate Robert so much just for being willing to have his story shared, to have this conversation with me, to open up on the things that, I mean, it's sensitive material. It's his story, it's his brokenness, and he's allowing that to be brought forth in order that you can come to a level of revelation and understanding. In the course that I created on Realms and Dimensions Unsealed, one of the reasons for that course was to break down the conversation that we're having and conversations like it to a biblical framework, which is why it's the only level 4 course at the Bride Ministries Institute. It is deep and it's not for everybody, but if you're looking for more explanation from a biblical perspective and biblical teaching as to how this conversation makes sense, that's where I put it. But we are also going to be doing a follow-up to this because we're not even through year 1 of the 5 years of work that we've done on the inside, and I'm telling you, there's a lot more to say about it. And so, with that said, Robert, thank you for
You're
taking the
welcome.
time.
And it's great to be part of God's kingdom work, and I do this not only to help others to understand what's happening, but another reason is also for other survivors to show that there is hope for them, and that they can come out of their isolation and out of their imprisonment, and so that there is hope for them as survivors to be set free. I won't say it is an easy journey by far, but it is feasible and it is possible if you are willing to do the hard work. And I hope that my story can help other survivors to come forward with their story, and that they can be set free, and that their story even can help other survivors on their turn. So I am glad that I can be used by God for His kingdom work, and to set the captives free. And so, and there is still much more that we can talk about in a follow up, and I'm more than willing to do that for the future. So it was great to be back on your show, and I don't mind for the future just to do it on video.
Okay. Awesome.
So
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Robert. Folks,
you're welcome.
until next time.
Yeah, till next time, and I hope that your audience will learn a lot out of it, and that I can do something with it, and that I can support survivors that I know with it.
God bless.
God bless you,
Godspeed.
and God bless everyone else. Thank
You've been listening to Discovering Truth with Dan Duvall. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, like our video, and share this with friends. This podcast is a production of Bride Ministries International. Visit our website at brideministriesinternational.com to enjoy the Bride Ministries Church, the Bride Ministries Institute, free resources, and to support us financially.